Snow hit the valley sideways, driven by a wind that scraped along the rock like sandpaper on bone. In the white glare of midday, the convoy looked almost peaceful from a distance, dark shapes crawling through an empty basin of snow and stone. Armored trucks, 2 track carriers, a handful of lighter snowmobiles lashed with gear. Engines growled low beneath the muffled world, leaving a torn black path behind them. Then the first tracer stitched the snow. It came from high on the northern ridge, a thin orange line that burned across the pale slope and sparked off the lead vehicle's glassy plate. For a heartbeat, no one seemed to process it. The world stayed quiet except for engines and the thin whine of wind. The second buzz tore into the open cargo bed of a utility truck, shredding canvas and flinging a soldier backward in a spray of red that looked almost black against the white. The valley woke up. "Contact right! Right! Right!" Someone screamed over the local net. Inside the third armored truck, the world became a box of noise. Men and women shoved shoulders, helmets clacked together. Breath came hot and fast in clouds that fogged the small windows. Shell casings from the roof gun rattled down the hatch like brass hail. "Where's it coming from?" the driver shouted, knuckles white on the wheel. "All over." The lieutenant in the back braced one hand on the roof, the other clamped around his headset. Static roared in his ear. "Main net is dead. I'm getting nothing from base." On the re-bench, a medic tried to push forward, his aid bag wedged between boots. "I heard someone hitting too. I need." The truck rocked hard as something heavy struck the armor. Dust and snow sifted from the ceiling. Someone swore. Someone else started laughing, too high and thin. The radio spat fragments of words through the distortion. "Tiger, say again, jamming, repeat, you." The sentence broke in a howl of white noise. The long-range link was gone. "Try the backup," the lieutenant yelled. "Short range, line of sight with overwatch." "Where the hell is our overwatch?" There was no answer from higher ground, only the crackle of static. Above them, on the right-hand ridge, a gunner swung his turret, trying to track the flashes that bloomed among the rocks. He never finished the motion. A single, sharp report echoed across the valley, clean, distinct, unlike the chatter of automatic fire. The gunner pitched sideways, a dark hole punched just below the rim of his helmet. His hand slid off the grip. The machine gun drooped, useless. "He's down. God, he's down," someone yelled from a nearby truck. That shot hadn't come from the same ridge as the ambitious. It had come from somewhere else entirely, angled in at a narrow line, too perfect to be an accident. Another shell landed at the nose of the convoy, throwing up a wall of snow and ice. The lead driver slammed brakes, tracks biting, but the blast had already torn a shallow crater under his front idler wheels. The vehicle lurched, trapped at a crooked angle. "Mortars," the lieutenant shouted as the next round slammed in behind the column. "We're bracketed. They've got us zeroed. Everyone out, out, out. Ditches, now." The valley became a maze of shrieking steel and fractures of light. Mortar rounds walked along the road in controlled steps, one at the front, one at the rear, each impact closer to the command vehicle in the center. Snow fountains rose and fell, leaving smoking pits behind. In the ditches, soldiers pressed themselves against frozen earth, helmets rammed down, trying to make their bodies flatter than they were. The lieutenant slid into the trench beside a sergeant, both of them sucking cold air. "Where is Overwatch?" the lieutenant rasped. His breath fogged the edge of his balaclava. His eyes were wild. "We're blind. We are completely." He was cut off by a new sound, a heavy machine gun opening up from a rock outcrop above and slightly ahead. The roar rolled down the valley, deeper and meaner than the lighter weapons. Rounds chewed into the middle of the column, sparks dancing on armor, glass bursting in spiderwebs. "Everyone stay." A single, distant crack split the air. The heavy gun stuttered, stopped. The gunner toppled forward off the rock, his body tumbling down the slope, leaving a trail of red dots on the white. For half a second, the only sound was the hiss of wind carrying cordite and smoke. "What the?" The sergeant beside the lieutenant slowly lifted his head just enough to peek. The outcrop still smoked from bursts, but the weapon lay silent. There had been no adjustment fire, no drawn-out duel, just one round and a dead gunner. Where did that come from? The lieutenant asked, more to himself than anyone else. Nobody knew. Another enemy fighter, closer to the head of the column, rose from behind a rock with a tube on his shoulder, wrestling a rocket toward the lead vehicle's crippled nose. The tube tracked. He squinted through the sight. Again, that clean, surgical report. A rifle shout, long and flat. The rocket man jerked backward as though punched. His trigger hand spasmed. The rocket coughed out, but his body was already falling, the projectile streaking wild into the sky and vanishing somewhere harmless downrange. Someone in the ditch laughed in disbelief. "Did you see that? Did you see?" "Shut up and stay down," the lieutenant snapped, though his own heart hammered hard enough that he could feel it in his teeth. High on the enemy ridge, a squad leader swore as he watched his assets drop one by one. "What is this?" He barked into his handset. "Who is shooting at the gun positions? That's not their convoy." "Could be their Overwatch team," a voice crackled back. "Then find them," he snarled. "On the ridge, there must be a nest. Get eyes above them. I want that shooter gone." But when he raised binoculars and scanned the opposing slopes, he saw nothing but an unbroken face of snow and rock, the occasional glint of sun on ice. No obvious muzzle flashes. No obvious hide. Down in the ditch, a young private clutched at his arm, blood seeping hot through his glove. His breathing came in sharp, panic bursts. "Hey, stay with me," his team leader muttered, pressing a bandage down. You're good, just a graze. You're fine." The wounded soldier stared past him, eyes fixed on the high ridgeline opposite. He'd seen the rocket man fall. He'd seen the heavy gunner collapse. He'd heard that different kind of shot. "Someone's up there," he whispered over local comms, voice thin but certain. "Something. Ghost on the ridge. Picking them off." His words rolled through the ditch on the unit channel, half superstition, half anchor. Ghost on the ridge. Something other than endless fire and the grinding certainty of a killbox. Something that made the enemy flinch. "Ghost can keep shooting," muttered the sergeant, not quite loud enough for the lieutenant to hear. "I'll light a candle later." The radio on the lieutenant's chest screamed static, then dipped, then rose again. Under the noise, a calm tone threaded through, like a line pulled straight through a tangle. "Break, break. This is Sierra 1, a female voice said, cleared despite the interference. "Convoy, you're in a pre-registered kill zone. Stay low. Do not bunch up. Mark smoke if you can. White for wounded concentration, blue for enemy positions." The lieutenant froze. The voice didn't have the edge of panic. It was almost relaxed, as if the speaker were reading a weather report instead of assessing a valley full of explosives. "Say again, Sierra 1, he said, pressing his headset tighter. "We have no contact with Overwatch." "Who is this?" "Later," she said. "Right now? You've got 2 minutes before they adjust mortars tighter around your center. I need smoke on that forward rock outcrop and any flash you can mark. I'll handle the rest." Another single, distant shot cracked. On the far ridge, a figure who had just stepped forward with binoculars pitched backward, binocular glass spraying in a bright glitter across the snow. "Smoke out," the sergeant shouted, snapping a canister and lobbing it up and out of the ditch. It landed in the churned road and began to gush colored cloud. All around the convoy, canisters arced into the open, hissing. White for casualty clusters, blue for suspected enemy positions. The colors mingled and twisted in the wind, a weird, swirling flag in the middle of disaster. In a brief cutaway, higher in the mountains, we see her. Not clearly, not yet. Just the angle of a prone figure tucked into a pocket of snow and rock, rifle resting on a bipod, face hidden behind wrap and scope. The barrel barely protrudes beyond the lip. There's no shine, no wasted movement. Only a gloved hand making tiny adjustments, the slow expansion and contraction of her shoulders as she breathes. The rifle barks, sending another round down the valley. Back in the kill box, a machine gun that had been chewing into the third truck side armor fell quiet mid-burst. When the smoke cleared for a second, its gunner was slumped over the weapon, body folded awkwardly. "Whoever Sierra 1 is," the lieutenant murmured, She just bought us 3 more seconds. 3 more seconds is 3 more lives, the medic said, crawling past him toward another moaning shape in the ditch. On the enemy side, the squad leader turned in a full circle, furious. She's not ours, someone said, breathless. We have no element on that ridge. It's got to be them. Then why didn't Intel flag it? The leader snapped. Why weren't we told they had a shooter up there? He looked again at the valley, now haze with smoke in multiple colors. He'd studied this ground for weeks. He'd walked it at night, paced the distances. He knew the mortar arcs, the machine gun sweeps, the ideal spots for rockets and snipers. He thought he knew every angle. Yet somewhere above, outside his carefully plotted geometry, someone was erasing his assets one by one. Find the shooter, he repeated, lower this time. Not an order, almost an appeal. Find that ridge ghost. The camera pulls back, away from individual faces and toward the scale of the trap. We see the valley from overhead now, as if from a drone that only the audience controls. The convoy is a bent line of dark rectangles and smaller dots, some scattered, some clustered in ditches. Around them, in the broken rock and carved snow, shapes move, enemy teams in white parkas shifting between firing points, mortar crews reloading, machine guns spitting. Colored smoke clouds twist in the stiff wind, marking wounds and threats. Beyond them, high as still, a single faint muzzle flash winks every so often from a sheer snow face that looks almost impossible to reach. No clear trail leads to it. No easy path. Narration, in a low, steady tone, overlays the image. 4 hours earlier, on a bright, harmless morning, a senior officer had laughed in her face and asked a question he thought was harmless. Your rank, he said, in front of 4 generals who stood just behind him. He didn't know, then, that by afternoon every single one of them would be praying that the quiet staff sergeant he was mocking could do the impossible from a frozen ridge. The shot holds on the ghost ledge, tiny, alone, and somehow holding back an avalanche of steel. The story slips back in time. The mountain outpost looked almost picturesque in the morning. Winter sun bounced off stacked snowbanks, turning the perimeter wire and antenna masts into hard lines of light. Prefabricated huts crouched against the hillside in orderly rows, smoke chimneys feathering upward. A black flag line of power cables cut across the pale sky. The cold bit, but the air was still, sound carrying clearly across the open. Inside the cramped operations room, it felt smaller than it looked from outside. Walls were buried behind maps, satellite photos, and whiteboards. A space heater in the corner rattled and hummed. Coffee steamed on a metal table scarred by mug rings and pen scratches. Staff Sergeant Nia Cole stood over the main map board, gloved finger tracing the thin blue line of the valley road. Her breath left faint mist on the laminated surface as she leaned in closer. Look at this, she murmured. No one answered. At the far end of the room, the intel officer was buried in a jumble of printed intercepts and radio logs. Near the door, a logistics sergeant argued with a communications tech about vehicle loadouts. The duty officer worked his way through a pile of paperwork, eyes flicking up only when the radio squawked. Nia stepped closer to the map, narrowing her eyes at the contour lines. The valley the convoy would travel through was a narrow notch in the mountains, 2 steep ridges pressing close on either side. The road snaked along the bottom, with only occasional shallow ditches and rocks still protruding through the snow. To either side, the slopes rose in a series of shelves and broken outcrops. In 3 separate places along their planned route, snow berms had collected in unusual, unnatural shapes. They were just a little too square, a little too regular. She circled one with her fingertip. These aren't drifts, she said, now loud enough to cut through the room's murmur. Look at the aerial from last month. No build-up here. Then 3 weeks later, suddenly you've got these drifts hugging perfect fields of fire. The intel officer looked up, blinking. I thought you were on the range, Cole. Range finished. She shifted the photo overlay. You see this right-hand ridge? They've got dead ground behind those berms where you could park a technical or set a heavy gun. Good cover from overhead sensors too. No heat signature until they are up and firing. The intel officer crossed the room, mug in hand. He peered at the photos, then shrugged. Could be just wind patterns, he said. We've had 3 storms since then. Snow collects in odd ways. Not that odd, she said, and not on all the likely gun lines. Before the conversation could deepen, the door opened and a gust of cold air spilled in, bringing with it the smell of exhaust and diesel. Briefing in 5, called a voice from the hallway. Senior staff, leadership, and anyone dumb enough to ride shotgun on this circus. Let's go. Nia glanced at the wall clock. She was right on time. She pulled her glove tighter, smoothed the corner of the map down, and followed the others out. The briefing room was only slightly larger than the operations cell, but the energy inside it was different. Livelier, looser. Chairs scraped, laughs rose and fell. A projector hummed, splashing a clean digital map of the valley onto a screen at the front. Nia stepped in quietly, rifle slung bare and stripped down over her shoulder. The metal was cold against her back, even through the layers. A captain she didn't know well, sharp jaw, immaculate uniform, the kind of officer who ironed his name tape, glanced up as she crossed the threshold. His gaze flicked to the rifle, then to her slightly snow-dusted boots. You lost, Sergeant, he drawled, smirk already in place. Range is on the other side of the compound. Staff Sergeant, she corrected, keeping her tone neutral. Overwatch element for the convoy, sir. I was told to attend. He lifted his brows, the smirk deepening. Overwatch, huh? He let the word hang as if it amused him. Your rank? Staff Sergeant Nia Cole, Sniper's section, she said, giving it as plainly as stating the weather. He opened his mouth, likely with some quip about punctuality or snow on his floor, but his eyes flicked just past her shoulder and froze. Because behind her, in the back of the room, 4 older men and women stood in quiet, heavy coats, their collars bearing familiar stars. No fanfare, no whispered announcements. There might have been any group of visiting staff, except for the way everyone else in the room held themselves just a little tighter. 4 generals, each from a different allied command, each watching. The captain straightened, only a hint late. One of the generals, a gray-haired woman with a scar along one cheek, tilted her head. She's your Overwatch, she asked, voice mild. Yes, the captain said quickly. One of them. He gestured awkwardly. We've got a robust force protection plan in place. This is a low-risk movement, but we... Low risk, another general murmured, scanning the screen where the valley glowed in false color. He glanced at Nia's boots, then at the faint scatter of dried mud on her rifle's handguard. You were at the range this morning, Sergeant. Yes, sir. Group size. Sub-MOA at 800, she said. Bit wider with gloves. A few chuckles rippled around the room. The captain forced a tight smile. Well, the gray-haired general said, I'm glad we'll have Overwatch. What's your coverage plan for the ridgeline? The captain recovered, clicking through slides that showed the route from above, convoy composition, timing, and checkpoints. Nia took a seat near the side wall, close enough to see the screen, far enough to stay out of the way. We'll push out in 3 serials, the captain said, pointer sweeping along the blue line. Tracked vehicles first, then wheeled, with the VIP element in the center. Movement start at 0900 to make the inspection window by 1100 at the relay site. On the screen, icons drifted along the road in simulation. The valley looked clean. Empty. Nia raised her hand slightly. So, if we delay step off by 30 minutes, we'll avoid moving through the narrowest section when the sun is at its highest, she said. Right now, schedule puts the convoy in that choke point at peak glare. That ridge has multiple defiles and berms. If someone's set up, glare will give them an advantage. The captain barely glanced at her. Appreciate the input, Staff Sergeant, but we're locked on timing, he said. We've got birds scheduled overhead at specific times and the relay team waiting at the far end. We shift, and everything slides. One adjustment could. We're not rewriting the op order in the brief, he cut in, smiled back and polished. We have air cover, armored escort, and we'll have you on a side ridge. More than enough for what amounts to a road trip with a photo op at the end. Behind him, the generals watched without interrupting. One of them, a tall man with a gravelly voice Naya recognized from a recorded address months ago, spoke at last. "Where exactly will Overwatch set up?" he asked. The captain clicked to another slide. A single icon on the side of the valley blinked. "Hey, this ridge gives them an oblique view of the route. Plenty of elevation. Good cover. They'll move ahead on foot and establish before we reach the danger area." "Good," the gray-haired general said. "We requested an experienced shooter because there have been incidents on these roads. Passive probes, drones at the limit of engagement zones. We're not assuming low risk." There was a subtle weight to that last sentence that made the room a shade quieter. Naya listened, studying the updated SAT imagery. Annotations labeled suspected snow drift, possible rockfall, and a few question marks where infrared returns had been odd the previous week. Her spotter, Corporal Ruffy, waited outside by the door, checking and rechecking gear. She saw him through the small window in the brief room wall, compact frame, hood up, goggles on his forehead. He ran through her kit with an almost ritual care, tightening the bipod, checking the torque on the scope mount, flipping through laminated range cards. On the table in front of her, Naya's fingers slipped under a small stack of fresh intercept printouts. She grabbed them on the way in. Halfway down one page, a line of translated text jumped out. 4 stars in the snow, keys in the valley. She felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. "So," she said quietly, waiting for a pause between slides. "We pulled some overnight chatter from the eastern side villages. Intercepts mention 4 stars and keys in the snow. That's more specific than random propaganda." The intel officer gave a shrug from the back. "We see that from time to time," he said. "They talk about stars, keys, thrones, all sorts of symbols. It's meant to rattle us. If there was something more concrete, the system would flag it." The captain nodded along. "We're not going to let ghost stories delay departure," he said. "We step off on time. Everyone executes their role. We'll be back by mid-afternoon, and you can all complain about how cold your toes got." More chuckles. The tension broke slightly. Pens scratched. Only Naya and the general stayed very still. The gray-haired general caught her eye, just for a second, and gave the faintest nod. Not reassurance, exactly. More like acknowledgement. "We heard you. We logged it. It wasn't the same as changing the plan. It would have to be enough." The motor pool line was a jagged row of steel and frost. Track carriers sat low and squat, their sides coated with a thin layer of ice. Lighter vehicles idled nearby, exhaust curling up in white plumes that blended with the sky. Snowmobiles lined up to one side, skis and tow sleds lashed behind them. Naya and Ruffy stood by a small table under an awning, checking and rechecking. Bipod, locked. Torque on screws, verified. Magazines, loaded, marked, counted again. Range cards, laminated, annotated, tucked into the chest pocket where she could reach them without fumbling. Ruffy held up a spare optic, older, simpler, less sleek than the main one mounted on her rifle. "You really want to bring this museum piece?" he asked. "We could grab a newer one from." "I know this one," she said. "Glass is clean, track's still solid. If the primary goes down, I'd rather trust something I've broken in myself." "You're thinking the primary might go down?" he asked, uneasy. "I'm thinking we're going into a valley with perfect lines for enemy guns and drifts that make no sense," she said. "And we're moving VIPs who've been named in chatter. So yes, I'm thinking about backups." He nodded, throat bobbing. "Copy that." For a moment, as the engines rumbled and people shouted over checklists, her vision blurred, not from the cold, but from something else rising up uninvited. Another winter, another mountain, the crack of a shot that came a half-second too late. A teammate spinning as the round found them instead. She saw a gloved hand reaching toward her, fingers already slack. A radio voice. "Why didn't you take the shot sooner?" "Because I second-guessed. Because the angle looked off. Because I thought I had one more breath." She pushed the memory down, checked the barrel crown again, feeling for imperfections that weren't there. Ruffy watched her, eyes thoughtful but unsmiling. He'd joined her team after that mission. He didn't know the details. He only knew there was a scar inside her that made her slower to trust intel and faster to trust terrain. "Hey," he said quietly. "We've got this. You've got this. I'll call wind and numbers. You poke holes in anyone dumb enough to show their face. Like we practiced." She let herself meet his gaze. "Like we practiced," she agreed. Across the line, the convoy commander, same captain, still crisp, still confident, walked along the vehicles, checking name tapes and vehicle markings. He paused when he reached Naya. "You too good?" he asked, hands in his gloves, posture casual. "Yes, sir," she said. "We'd still be better off if we pushed step off by 30 minutes. He gave a short laugh. "You snipers and your superstitions," he said. "We stick to schedule. Overwatch on the ridge, convoy in the valley, air on call if needed. It's a basic escort call, not a war." "Copy, sir," she said. He clapped Ruffy on the shoulder, more for show than anything else, then moved on. Engines revved higher as drivers settled into gear. Tracks clanked. The air filled with shouted last-minute orders, the metallic bang of hatches closing, the squeal of brakes. "Let's move," Naya said. She and Ruffy stepped off on foot, cutting away from the road and heading toward the start of their long climb. Behind them, the convoy began to roll, vehicles moving in a slow, heavy procession out of the base gate and toward the white horizon. From their rising vantage point, the valley looked almost peaceful. Naya's boots bit through the crusted snow with each step, sending tiny bursts of powder puffing up around her ankles. Her breath misted the inside of her neck gaiter. The air thinned as they climbed, but the view opened. Below, the convoy snaked forward. Lead carrier, second carrier, then the utility trucks and armored cars with the VIPs in their center. Snowmobiles darted along the flanks like small, restless animals. The line left a dark wound in the pristine valley floor. "Range to lead?" she asked, lifting her binoculars. Ruffy checked his handheld. 900 and closing, he said. "They are a little ahead of the timeline." "Of course they are," she muttered. The sun had climbed just enough that glare bounced off the right-hand ridge, turning exposed rock faces into bright smears of light. "Look," she said, pointing, as the last vehicle in the column passed a particular bend. A snowbank just beyond it slumped and shifted, as if something had disturbed its base. A faint glint of metal flashed from beneath a ledge for half a heartbeat, then vanished. Ruffy saw it too. "That's not natural," he said. "No," she agreed. "No, it's not." She thumbed her radio. "Convoy actual. This is Sierra 1, she said. "Recommend halt and check at grid 683. Unusual snow movement and possible hardware under rock. Could be a trigger point." Static hissed back at her. She adjusted frequency. "Convoy actual, Sierra 1. Say again, recommend halt at." The static changed. Under it, a low hum rose, like someone rolling a heavy barrel down a wooden hallway. "Sierra 1, say again your," the words chopped. The hum grew. "Jamming?" Ruffy asked. "Feels like it," she said, adjusting again. "Try relay to base." He did. The response was the same. Fragments, then distortion, then nothing. Down in the valley, in the lead truck, one of the generals leaned toward the front. "Why are we losing contact with Overwatch?" he asked. The captain, headset crooked under his helmet, gave a quick, dismissive shake of his head. "Ridge shadow at this point in the valley, sir," he said. "They're going to drop off the net now and then. Line of sight limitations. Nothing to worry about." The general's gaze slid sideways to the window. Outside, snowbanks rose and fell. The ridges leaned inward. From Naya's position, the road looked like a funnel. "Come on," she murmured. "See it. Somebody, see it." No one halted. The convoy rolled into the first choke point. The blast under the third vehicle came without warning. One moment, the carrier was grinding forward, tracks chewing. The next, the entire front section jumped as if rammed by a giant shoulder. An explosion spat snow and shrapnel in all directions. The vehicle's nose dropped into a newly opened hole with a sickening metal groan. "IED," someone shouted, though the word barely did justice to the controlled violence of the blast. Before echoes faded, A second explosion roared at the rear of the column, under the last truck. That vehicle flipped partially onto its side, blocking the road behind, its cargo flying out in a spew of broken crates and gear. Front and rear disabled, Ruffy breathed. They boxed them in. Naya's hands moved before the thought fully formed. She dropped to a knee, rifle off her shoulder, glass up. Enemy fighters were already popping up along the ridges, rifles and machine guns barking almost in unison. It had the feel of a signal, a master clock ticking over and triggering pre-planned fire. Multiple firing points, both sides, she said, more to herself than anyone. This is not some village crew. Down in the valley, soldiers tumbled from vehicles into the ditches, boots sliding on ice and slush. The air filled with shouts, the pounding strobe of gunfire, the distinctive thump of a mortar somewhere unseen. "Get down!" the lieutenant screamed. "Everybody into cover. Move, move, move." Naya and Ruffy tried to shift left, toward the small shelf they planned to use as an initial hide. Bullets began snapping across their path, carving puffs of white from the snow. "They're already watching this ridge," Ruffy gasped. "They knew we'd be up here." "Down," she ordered. They dove into a shallow depression, little more than a sag in the slope, but enough to break a bit of line of sight. Snow crust scratched her cheek as she pressed into it. "Ruffy," she called. He answered with a strangled sound. She rolled toward him and saw blood blooming through his pant leg, a darker patch spreading near his shoulder where shrapnel had found him. "Hold still," she said, voice instantly clipped and clinical. Training kicking in, overriding panic. Tourniquet, high on the thigh. She yanked a strap free, cinched, twisted, locked. Ruffy hissed through his teeth, face going gray. "Hey," she said, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You're not done yet. You call my rangers. You hear me?" He swallowed. Yeah, I've got you." She dragged him further behind a low ridge of packed snow, giving them a little more cover. It cut down their view, though. From here, she could see only slices of the valley. Snow spat around them as stray rounds found their depression. The hum in her headset resolved into a pattern. The enemy wasn't just jamming. There were sweeping bands of frequencies, actively trying to blind everything in the area. "Higher is deaf," she said. "We're on our own up here." She raised her scope, peeking just enough to catch a glimpse of a vehicle tucked under a rock shelf on the far side of the valley. It looked wrong. Too boxy, too static. Antennas bristled from its roof under a camo net. A cable ran from its side into the snow. "Found your jammer," she murmured. "Of course it's parked where I can't see its center mass without putting my head on a platter." From their partial vantage, she watched mortars drop with eerie precision around the command vehicle. Each round landed closer, walking inward with professional discipline. No panic, no random scatter. Someone had spent time dialing this in. In the ditches below, infantry squads tried to crawl and then sprint toward flanking positions, only to be hammered back by overlapping machine gun fire from both ridges. The generals, identifiable even in hastily donned cold-weather gear by their posture and the way people clustered protectively around them, ended up in the same shallow trenches as everyone else. Their stars meant nothing to the rounds whipping overhead. Rank didn't make bullets change course. "Whoever planned this," Ruffy muttered through clenched teeth, "had our route in their hands for weeks." "Yes," Naya said, voice flat. "They did." He turned his head toward her. "We need a different angle," he said. "From here, we're spectators." She'd already come to the same conclusion. Their current ridge, chosen for its balance of safety and sightlines, had been anticipated. If she continued trying to work from this depression, she'd be trading shots with shooters who had the advantage. They needed to get somewhere no one expected, which was when she saw it, a narrow, shadowed chute of ice that cut up the side of the mountain, disappearing into a sheer snow face. It looked less like a path and more like a scar. Dangerous, exposed, and utterly outside the neat little boxes on the captain's slides. She eyed it, then the valley, then Ruffy, then the jammed radio. Her heart gave one hard thump. She thought of the other winter, the other cliff, the breath she'd taken instead of the shot. Not this time. The climb was uglier up close than it had looked from a distance. The ice chute was just wide enough for a single person, its sides slick and worn by melt and refreeze. Snow here clung in uneven slabs. A wrong step would send it sliding, taking her with it. Nia moved anyway. She left Ruffy with his back against the small snow wall, his leg bandaged tight, his shoulder strapped down as best as field gear allowed. She propped a local radio console beside him, tucked a pistol near his hand, and looked him in the eye. "I'm going up," she said. "Of course you are," he tried to joke, but his voice cracked. "You always do pick the scenic route. If I stay here, I'm lying down and listening while they finish the convoy," she said. "I can't see what I need to see from this hole. Up there," she jerked her chin toward the ice chute. "I might get the jammer, the mortars, maybe the sniper we haven't seen yet." "You won't be on the net," he said. "Doesn't matter," she replied. "It's just numbers and distances. We've done that without radios before." He grasped her wrist. "Don't hesitate," he said, and she knew exactly which memory he was pointing at without naming it. "You see them, you shoot. No second-guessing. No waiting for permission." "I know," she said. She meant it. Then she turned and started up. Snow under her boots broke in small cascades, sliding down past her legs. She climbed without ropes, using handholds in the ice and rock where she could. Ammunition weighed on her hips, rifle strapped across her back diagonally. Every movement was deliberate. Any misjudged leap or hurried grab might kill her with no enemy help at all. Gunfire drifted up from the valley, more distant now, but no less urgent. Mortar blasts thumped through the mountain like a heartbeat. Her own breath filled her ears, loud inside her balaclava. Halfway up the chute, a round hit somewhere close enough to send rock chips skittering past her cheek. One shard sliced along the edge of her scope, cracking the lens housing with a tiny, cursed sound. She pressed herself flat against the ice, mind racing. The glass still looked clay. She could risk it, but a damaged optic was a coin flip, might hold zero, might send a critical shot just off target. The old backup optic in her pack was less refined, less bright, but utterly known. She slid carefully into a micro-ledge, braced with her knees, shrugged out of the rifle, and swapped optics with fingers that moved more from habit than preference. Each click of the old mount's seating felt like anchoring herself to something she'd used in rain, in dust, in earlier winters. The valley didn't stop while she worked. Another mortar went off, closer to the convoy's center. A scream rose thin and carried on the wind, then cut off abruptly. She didn't let herself dwell on the voice. She tightened the last screw, tested the throw, ran through her mental adjustment differences. This optic's hash marks meant different holds. The world at 800 meters would look different through its glass. She recalculated, and then she climbed again. The enemy began to sense movement. Bursts of fire licked higher up the slope, rounds punching small holes in the snow. They didn't know exactly where she was, but they suspected. A stray round smashed into the ice wall inches from her hand, showering her in freezing spray. "You're slow," the voice in her memory sneered. The same voice that had judged her once. "You're always too slow." "No, not today." A new shadow swept in from the far ridge, a fast-moving snow squall, darker cloud dragging flecks of white behind it. The light dimmed. Visibility began to degrade by degrees. For most of the valley, that would be a curse. For her, right now, it was extra cover. She heaved herself over a final cornice, arms shaking, and sprawled belly down on a narrow lip of snow. Below, the mountain face dropped away in a near-vertical fall, studded with jagged rocks. Ahead, the ridge flared out just enough to let her crawl along it in a low, unstable line. From here, the valley looked transformed. She could see the jammer truck fully now, camo net, antenna cluster, cable snake. She saw the mortar pit's location, the paths runners took to bring shells. Two machine gun nests she'd only glimpsed before now lay exposed at different angles. She also picked up the glint of another scope on a distant spur, the enemy's sniper, watching over the entire operation. Far below, blue and white smoke mingled with a natural fog of breath and blast. Vehicles smoldered. Figures moved crawling or hunched, trying to be small in a world designed to catch them standing. She pulled the rifle around, settled it on its bipod, and checked her remaining magazines. Not many rounds left. Not enough for every threat. She'd have to be very selective. The wind picked up, carrying icing needles that stung her eyes even behind glass. Snow began to blow sideways, cutting contrast, softening edges. It gave her a narrow window. She could shoot before the storm fully blanked the valley, but every minute made each shot harder. She focused on her breathing. In for 4. Hold for 2. Out for 4. Let the valley's chaos fall away until only lines, distances, and timing existed. Then she began to break the kill chain. From her ledge, the enemy network became a diagram only she could see. She started with the one threat that could threaten her most quickly, the enemy sniper. He lay prone on a spur slightly higher than the mortar pit, rifle trained toward the valley. His task was simple: watch for any unexpected shooter and kill them before they killed his people. He was the one the enemy leader relied on. Naya framed him in her old optic. The glass was dimmer than the primary, but crisp enough. She judged the distance, checked wind with a few grains of snow off her glove, and made a small correction on the dial. He exhaled slowly, unaware that his scope was about to become his coffin. Her shot cracked across the valley. Through the scope, she saw the front lens of his optic burst outward. His head snapped back. Then he went completely still. Sniper down, she whispered to herself. One link in the chain, broken. She didn't wait to admire the result. The machine gun nest on the convoy's left flank was next. It was pinning down a squad that had nearly made it to better cover. As she watched, one of the trapped soldiers tried to drag a wounded comrade and was slammed into the side of a truck by a burst that bit the armor inches from their heads. Naya shifted, settled, compensated for the gun's movement. Shot. Crack. The gunner folded sideways. The assistant, reaching instinctively for the grips, took a second round into the upper chest. The gun fell silent. Down below, the pinned squad surged forward, hauling the wounded man behind a boulder that finally put real rock between them and most of the fire. Her third shot targeted a heavy weapon aimed at the command vehicle, a shoulder-fired system braced on a rock. If that round landed, there would be nowhere for the generals and their staff to hide. She timed it, waited for the slightest stillness as the operator aligned his sights, then squeezed. He dropped. The weapon slid from his grasp, nose dipping into the snow. 3 rounds. 3 decisive changes in the valley's geometry. The enemy felt each one. On a secondary ridge, a spotter with binoculars caught a flicker of her muzzle flash through the blowing snow. It was faint, but enough. Up there, he yelled into his handset, pointing. High ridge, northern face. That's where the shots are coming from. The squad leader on the enemy side swore. Teams Alpha and Beta, move to flank that ridge position, he ordered. Take climbers if you have to. Bring her head. A small team peeled off from their supporting positions and began moving toward the base of Naya's cliff. At the same time, a crew in a sheltered alcove unfolded a portable drone, its rotors whining to life. The drone leapt into the air, rising quickly. Its small camera scanned the ridges, searching for heat signatures and unusual shapes against the snow. Naya saw it clear the edge of the far ridge. For a second, she considered leaving it alone. One more shot would be one less bullet for more critical targets. But if that drone relayed a clean fix on her position, mortars could walk rounds onto her ledge with horrifying accuracy. She tracked the little buzzing shape, waited until it hovered near a point where its movement was minimal, and held. One breath. One exhale. Crack. The drone's body jerked, one rotor shattering. It spun wildly, then dropped like a stone, vanishing into the swirling snow with a faint crunch. But that shot, higher and slightly more exposed, gave away her approximate perch to anyone watching closely. Mortars started to pivot. She knew it by the way their thumps changed direction, by the new pattern of impacts walking up the slope toward her. The first round landed low, showering her ledge with rock chips and chunks of ice. The second landed closer, the concussion slamming against her teeth and bones. She ducked, body pressed flat, then raised the rifle again. She couldn't sit still and hope they'd miss. She had to finish the chain. The Gemma came next. She dialed back to it. The truck hunkered under its rock shelf like a spider in a crevice. Through the optic, she could see figures moving around it, hunched over equipment, guarded by 2 fighters with rifles. She noted the angle. A direct centermass shot might hit reinforced panels. She needed something more delicate. Wind gusted, pushing the scope's reticle slightly off. She waited for a lulled moment, trusting the tiny gaps in the storm. Then she aimed not at the people, but at the cab window. The round shattered the glass, punched through into the interior, and struck something vital. A heartbeat later, sparks burst from the radio racks. Smoke curled from under the canvas. One of the operators staggered backward, clutching at his chest and neck, then collapsed. The hum in her headset cut, mid-sweep. Down in the valley, radios that had been nothing but white noise suddenly sprang to life. "This is Hawk 2? We are. Jesus. It's back. Convoy actual. Confirmed status. Base to all elements. Jamming appears to be down. Repeat. Overwatch. This is actual. If you can hear me, that last shot was." The valley's separate islands of struggle linked back into one network. Nia didn't answer. She couldn't risk transmitting from this exposed ledge. Let them think she was busy. She was. With jamming gone, a general in the ditch pressed his headset tighter. "This is General Lawson," he said, voice steady. "We've got a shooter on our side up on that ridge. She's opening gaps. I want every able soldier using those gaps. Right side flank. Take that rock outcrop now while their guns are down. Move." Orders rippled outward. Soldiers who had been hugging the earth now surged in controlled bursts, running from cover to cover using the momentary lulls Nia had created. The enemy mortars, suddenly aware their jammer was gone and that higher headquarters could now call for heavier support, shifted priorities. Rounds began to slam higher, onto Nia's ridge. One hit close enough that she felt the blast before she heard it. The shockwave slapped her body into the snow, knocking the breath from her lungs. Pebbles and ice cut small lines along her cheek. Her rifle jumped, almost skidding toward the edge. She grabbed it, fingers numb, dragged it back, and checked it by touch. Still intact, still serviceable. Her ammunition, on the other hand, was nearly gone. She checked the remaining rounds in her last magazine and the few loose ones tucked in her glove. Not enough. She had to pick between immediate threats to the convoy and the nerve center of the ambush. Her scope drifted over the mortar pit. Shells came up, dropped into the tubes, fired. They were walking rounds now, a little off without sniper support spotting for them. Still deadly. Her reticle slid past them to the figure standing near the pit, the same squad leader who'd been barking orders earlier. He had a field radio pressed to his ear, shouting, likely coordinating the entire attack. If he went down, their carefully synchronized movements might unravel. She focused on him. The wind buffeted the barrel. She compensated, trusting her old optic and her own feel. Snow stung her eyes. In her mind, another winter flickered. A figure whose life could have been saved. A shot she'd taken just late. The shame had sat under her sternum like a stone ever since. Not now. She fired. The round hit the squad leader centermass. He jerked backward, the handset flying from his fingers. He dropped into the mortar pit, knocking one crewman off balance and slamming into a stack of shells. Instantly, chaos flew outward. The crew scrambled. Someone shouted to check if he was alive. Others ducked, unsure whether to keep firing without commands. Their previous smooth rhythm disintegrated. Without his orders, the overlapping fields of fire that had made the kill box so deadly began to fray. Guns fired out of sync. Some positions went quiet altogether, their operators unsure whether to relocate or hold. Down in the valley, the change was palpable. "Now," the lieutenant shouted, sensing the opening. "Left squad, peel and hit that nest. Right squad, push toward the rock shelf." The bounding advance that followed looked nothing like the chaos of the ambush's first moments. It was practiced, sharp, and opportunistic. Soldiers moved in coordinated pairs, one covering while the other ran, using the smoke and confusion as a cloak. They overran one of the machine gun positions Nia had already wounded, finishing off the last defenders. In the process, they grabbed a dazed enemy fighter and yanked him into their line. "What was this?" a sergeant snarled, shaking the captive by his collar. "Who are you after? Why here?" The fighter spat blood, eyes glassy. "We were told 4 stars in the valley," he muttered in accented speech. "We take them. We take the keys. Your whole net opens. World sees your generals on their knees." He laughed once, weakly, and got dragged away. Naya couldn't hear the words from her ridge, but she could see the fighter's posture, the aggressive yank. She saw his hands gesture toward the generals. She saw the look that passed between Lawson and the others when they realized they had indeed been targets, not incidental passengers. In the distance, a new sound layered over the rest. The deeper, farther-off thump of friendly artillery. With the jammer down and coordinates pouring in, higher headquarters had finally committed heavy guns. Shells landed on the far ridges, throwing arcs of rock and snow into the air, erasing some enemy positions entirely. Below her ledge, the small enemy team that had started climbing finally reached the base of a cliff. She heard faint shouts, the clink of metal on rock. They were close now, too close. She had maybe 3 or 4 rounds left. Each one had to count. She scanned the valley quickly, searching for any remaining heavy threat to the convoy. Her scope found a crew hurriedly setting up a larger weapon near the convoy's rear, likely trying one last time to punch into their circle. She could focus on the climbers and buy herself more time. Or she could remove that rear threat and give the convoy a cleaner breakout. It wasn't much of a choice. She adjusted, drew a bead on the heavy weapon gunner, and fired. He dropped. The assistant reached instinctively for the weapon. She fired again. The assistant sprawled, arms flung wide. That left 2 rounds. The climbers were shouting now. Closer. One slipped, a small slide of snow and curses giving away his near fall. They were moving carefully, weapons slung, focused on making the ascent. A mortar round landed higher up the ridge, kicking loose an avalanche of snow that cascaded down the face like a slow white wave. Naya flattened herself as the edge of it swept across her ledge, half burying her. The climbers below, suddenly engulfed in their own cascade, lost their holds. One screamed as he slid, hitting rocks on the way down. The other clung desperately to a protruding boulder, boots kicking at loose ice. Using the brief whiteout, Naya crawled laterally along the ridge, moving away from where the mortar crews had last bracketed. She left her original depression half filled with snow and debris, a tempting target for any follow-up rounds. Her muscles shook. Her lungs burned. Her fingers ached with cold and strain. But when she looked down and saw the convoy's vehicles beginning to reposition into a defensive circle at a slightly wider section of the valley, medics working in the center, smoke now mostly their own, not the enemy's, she knew the chain was finally breaking. She'd carved enough holes in the geometry for them to escape. The rest would be ugly, close, and personal. But it would be a fight, not a massacre. The valley's noise didn't stop all at once. It bled out in stages. First, the mortars fell silent, their crews either dead, scattered, or smart enough to realize staying put meant dying under the incoming artillery. Then the machine guns dwindled, cut off or overrun. Rifle fire tapered, reduced to sporadic cracks as small groups of attackers tried to melt back into the fold of the ridge and got hunted down by the now rallying convoy troops. Air support thundered overhead at last, jets streaking low, the ripple of their presence shaking snow from the cliffs. They didn't release ordnance yet, not with friendly forces threaded so tightly through the engagement area. But their very presence signaled to the ambushes that the window was closing. In the end, it was the wind that reclaimed the valley. It swept across the churned snow, smoothing small edges, carrying away the last wisps of colored smoke. It moved through the shallow ditches where bodies lay, living and dead. It whispered up the ridges, past the shattered drone and the abandoned technical, the busted jammer truck and the cratered mortar pit. Naya lay prone on her new ledge, cheek against the stock, scope scanning for any last enemy muzzle flash. She held position longer than her muscles wanted, long after most of the obvious threats were gone. Adrenaline kept her still as much as discipline. When her radio finally crackled with a clear, strong signal, it sounded almost wrong. Sierra 1. This is Convoy Actual, came the captain's voice, smaller now, less polished. If you are on this net, please respond. She considered staying silent, staying a myth. Then Practicality 1. They needed coordinates, damage assessments, next steps. Being a ghost had its uses, but so did being a professional. Sierra 1 copies, she said, voice steady despite the exhaustion. Engagement picture, enemy elements largely broken. Multiple positions neutralized. Suggest caution on all approaches. There may still be stragglers. There was a pause on the other end. When the captain spoke again, his tone had shifted. Understood, he said. Sierra 1, that was good work. She let the compliment pass unanswered. Any casualties on Overwatch? A different voice cut in, General Lawson. One wounded, she said. Stable for now. I'll bring him down when the slope is secure enough to move. Understood, Lawson said. We'll send up a small team to meet you halfway. No, she said. Enemy climbers tried the same route. There's fresh instability and loose snow. Too many boots up here and we'll trigger something. I'll bring him as far as I can. Meet us at the base. Another pause. Then Lawson simply said, very well. We'll be there. She pushed herself upright, joints protesting. Carefully, slowly, she reversed her crawl, then her climb, working back toward the ice chute and the small depression where she'd left Ruffy. She found him awake, pale, but grinning weakly. You still with me? She asked. Was starting to think you moved to another mountain, he said. Not yet. She glanced down the chute. The path looked even worse on the way down. Extra loose snow from blasts and slides, scoured ice patches. She'd have to go first, find solid holds, then guide him step by step. Can you put weight on the good leg? She asked. Define weight, he muttered, but nodded. She got his arm over her shoulders, braced his injured side as best she could, and together they began the slow, brutal descent. Below, figures were already moving toward the base of the ridge. Medics, infantry, and among them, a handful of senior officers with stars on their collars, all bundled in cold weather gear like everyone else. The mountain didn't care about the insignia. Neither had the rounds. They set up the makeshift command tent not far from where the third vehicle still sat stuck at an angle, its tracks frozen in a twisted trench. Someone had cleared a space in the snow, laid down tops, erected canvas walls against the wind. Inside, lanterns glowed, radios crackled, and the air smelled of antiseptic, oil, and tired humanity. Nia ducked in after handing Ruffy over to medics. Her cheeks were raw. Dried blood made a stiff line along one side of her face. Her hands still trembled very slightly, though she kept them tucked behind her back. On a table in the center of the tent lay a spread of captured gear, rifles, radios, paper maps, and ruggedized drives. A laptop tethered to a secure system was already working through the data. An intel specialist, cheeks ruddy from the cold, pointed at the screen. They were after user credentials, he said. Not just phones or laptops. Keys, password tokens, anything that could crack the new relay's encryption. These guys weren't random fighters. They had a list of the general's travel patterns. General Lawson nodded, jaw tight. So they didn't want to just kill us, he said. They wanted to show us kneeling on their feeds while they tore open our main artery. The intel specialist swallowed. Yes, sir. That appears to be the plan. Capture, broadcast, exploit. And they almost did it, another general said. If not for... His gaze shifted to Nia. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the senior investigator, a colonel from higher headquarters who had arrived by helicopter in the last half hour, cleared his throat. There's another matter we need to address while we've got everyone here, he said. He held a file in his hand, the edges slightly damp from snow. Staff Sergeant Cole, do you recall an incident 3 winters ago on Ridge Echo? Nia's spine stiffened. Yes, sir, she said carefully. A teammate was killed, the colonel said. Review at the time blamed delayed engagement from your position. You signed off on that assessment. Yes, sir, she said again. The colonel opened the file, pulled out a sheet, and laid it flat. New statements have come to light, he said. including one from the lieutenant who was in command that day. He admits he held you for a clearer identification longer than he should have, then allowed the report to be written in a way that suggested you were at fault. You didn't contest it. Nia kept her eyes on the table. I was the one on the trigger, she said. It was my responsibility. Partially, the colonel said, but the lieutenant was the one who delayed the call. Lawson spoke quietly. You carried that mark on your record for 3 years, he said. You knew it was not entirely accurate, and you didn't fight it. It was done, she said. Fighting it would have been a distraction, and he was young. It would have destroyed him. Silence settled over the tent for a heartbeat. The captain from that morning sat stiffly in a folding chair along the side, bandage on his forehead where shrapnel had grazed him. He looked at her now with a mix of confusion and something like shame. One of the other generals, the one who'd asked about group size, leaned forward. This morning, he said, I watched you raise concerns about the route and schedule. I watched them get dismissed. I also heard you mention intercepts about 4 stars and keys in the snow. You saw the pattern before we did. Nia didn't answer. She didn't need to. The evidence sat outside the tent, burned into the valley floor. The same general glanced at the captain. I also heard someone in this room laugh and say your rank, as if it were a punchline, he said softly. Color rose under the captain's bandage. He didn't speak. Lawson straightened. Staff Sergeant Cole, he said, walk us through your decisions from the moment the first shot hit the convoy. She did. No flourish. No drama. Just a clear, economical description in chronological order. She talked about seeing the snowbank slump, the glint of metal, the jamming signature. About the first move to the depression, Ruffy's wounds, the ice chute, the damaged optic and the swap to backup. She described building the target ladder, sniper, machine guns, jammer, mortar, squad leader, and why that sequence would destabilize the killbox fastest. She didn't embellish her own role. She included Ruffy's ranging, the squad's courage in exploiting openings, the medic's stubborn refusal to let shock take anyone without a fight. When she reached the turning point shot on the squad leader near the mortar pit, one of the generals exhaled slowly. And you knew the risk, he said, that every shot you took gave them a better idea of where to drop shells on your head. Yes, sir, she said. Not shooting was the bigger risk. She finished with a simple summary. From that ridge, with that window, those were the only choices I saw that made sense. The tent was silent for a moment. Then Lawson nodded once. That's all we needed, he said. Thank you. He glanced at the captain. Do you have anything to add? Lawson asked him. The captain swallowed. Only that, he started, then stopped. His usual glibness deserted him. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. Only that I was wrong this morning, he said. About the risk. About the route. About her. Lawson's mouth twitched, almost but not quite a smile. He turned back to Nia. One more question, he said. For the record. Yes, sir. This morning, when I asked your group size, you told me numbers. Now, after everything you've just done, if someone asked you what matters most out there, what would you say? She thought about it. About the ridge that didn't care how many stars sat in a ditch below. About the bullets that had flipped vehicles regardless of rank. About the way everyone had looked the same under snow and blood. Out there, she said quietly, rank doesn't stop rounds. The ridge doesn't care about insignia. Only what you do when it starts. The colonel wrote the words down, not as poetry, as testimony. Lawson looked at the other generals. They nodded, almost imperceptibly. Then we're done here, he said. For now, we'll formalize recommendations when we're back at base. But I can tell you already, we're going to have a lot to say about Overwatch selection and about listening when the person who knows the ground speaks. He closed the folder with a soft snap. Outside, the wind was picking up again, carrying fine snow under the tent flaps. Dusk came early in the mountains. By the time the last casualties were loaded, the wrecked vehicles assessed, and the most dangerous ordnance cleared, the sky had gone from hard blue to a deeper, softer gradient. The first stars blinked on overhead, indifferent. Nia walked the perimeter alone. The sandbag wall around the newly resecured convoy site had been reinforced, gaps filled, firing positions marked. A few soldiers smoked in small knots, hands cupped around lighters. Laughter drifted from one corner, not joyous, exactly, but brittle and necessary. She paused, resting gloved hands on the cold fabric of a barrier. Her breath plumed in front of her, then vanished. At the medical corner, under a heated canopy, she caught a glimpse of Ruffy propped up on a stretcher, leg elevated, shoulder bandaged. He saw her and lifted 2 fingers in a lazy salute. She returned it with a small nod. Behind her, the tent flap rustled. She didn't turn right away. "We'll be wheels up soon," Lawson's voice came. Closer now, unamplified by any radio. "Weather gives us a window, and I'd rather not tempt whoever orchestrated today to try again." She looked over her shoulder. All 4 generals stood there, coats buttoned up, hats pulled low. In the dim light, they looked like any other group of senior officers, tired, lined, carrying more weight in their eyes than on their shoulders. "We'll be ready, sir," she said. Lawson stepped closer, resting one hand lightly on the sandbag beside hers. "That ridge," he said, nodding toward the silhouette where she'd spent the worst of the day, "is going to be in training slide soon. People are going to analyze your shots, your movements. They're going to use your decisions as case studies." She made a face. "That sounds awful," she said honestly. He chuckled, low. "It's how this works," he said. "We treat what happened as a story, so the next person doesn't have to pay as much in blood to learn the same lessons." He looked at her a long moment. "You know," he said slowly, "this morning when I heard that your rank comment, I made a note to myself. I wanted to know if the staff sergeant who walked into that room would act like a professional when someone tried to reduce her to a punchline. I've seen both types." "And?" she asked. "You didn't flinch," he said. "You took it, gave the information you had, and then went where you were told you were needed. And when the valley went sideways, you didn't ask for permission to save us. You just did the work." She looked away, toward the ridge. "That's the job," she said. "It's more than that," he said. "But we don't need to argue names for it right now." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. It wasn't formal, not yet. Just a draft recommendation, lines of text under a makeshift header. "When we get home," he said, "this is going to move. Promotions board. Assignment options. I suspect a bigger patch of sky is in your near future." She hesitated. "Sir," she said, "I'm fine on the ridge. I don't need." "You're not going to stop climbing ridges just because your rank changes," he said. "But your voice will carry farther in rooms like that briefing. I'd rather it did." She didn't answer. He tucked the paper away again. "Take a walk," he said. "Say goodbye to your ghost up there. Tomorrow, we're going to write this up like a report. Tonight, it's still a story." He turned and walked back toward the tents, the other generals falling in beside him. Naya stayed where she was. Snow fell softly now, individual flakes catching the last light. They landed on her shoulders, her hat, the sandbags, on the tracks left by boots and wheels, on the slick black stains where earlier life had bled out. She looked up at the ridge one last time. In her mind's eye, she saw the ledge as it had been under her chest, narrow, treacherous, crumbling. She heard again the crack of each shot, the small intake of breath before each trigger pull. The fear that had tried to freeze her. The way she'd moved anyway. Out there, rank doesn't stop rounds, she had said in the tent. Up on that ledge, it had been true. Down here, walking along the sandbag wall, it was still true in a different way. She took a slow breath, then turned and walked toward the medical canopy, toward Ruffy's lazy salute and the quiet hum of generators and heaters. Toward a future that would likely drag her into rooms and onto ridges she hadn't yet imagined. Behind her, the valley lay quiet again. Anyone passing through in a few weeks might see only faint scars in the snow, a few blackened marks on rock, a slightly unnatural slump in the terrain. They might never guess what the place had tried to become. They would not know that once, on a winter afternoon, 4 generals crouched in the same ditch as their lowest-ranked soldiers and survived because a quiet staff sergeant on a near-impossible ridge refused to be what anyone thought her rank meant. They would not know there had been a ghost on the ridge, but the people who had been there would remember. And the mountain, indifferent and unjudging, would wait for whoever came next, caring nothing for stars, stripes, or stories, only for what they did when it started.